Okay, good morning. Today we are in chapter 7, moving along. It's our 10th class in this chapter. It's not just a very long chapter. It's a very, very huge concept chapter, talking about tzimtzum, talking about the contraction, the original contraction, what makes it unique. Talks about Seviv, Memale, the fundamental ideas of Hasidus. And we are right now on page Daled, or will be the equivalent of page 167 in the Tanya towards the top of the page. We introduced the idea of Seviv and Memale because we wanted to go and explain how is it possible for Hashem to fill up and to be intimately involved or completely filling up the world and at the same time and affecting the world at the same time unaffected. So we explained that Hashem has two, I don't know if it's two ways or two perspectives or two approaches how he fills the world with himself. One way is what's called Seviv. God's over-encompassing and makiftic surrounding, so to speak, light fills the world without taking into consideration any of the receiver, which means it's like a speech given to a mixed crowd by Einstein, where he's speaking above everyone's head. Everyone hears it, but he is more sharing himself, not considering who is the listener. Should I modify it to make it understood? Should I make it shorter? Should I explain more details? It's just speaking. And the receivers can't really accept it properly because no one really is in the realm of the topic. At the same time, everyone hears it, everyone gets it the same way. That's like a little bit of what Seviv is. Memale is where the information or the subject being shared or the thing being shared, whether it's light, whether it's energy, electricity, intellect, emotions, are completely considering the receiver. Not just considering the receiver, but by Hashem, when he shears Memale, it's not that the receiver is, so to speak, only able to receive such an amount. Because God is sharing such an amount, that becomes the identity of the receiver. That's what the receiver can receive. In other words, it's not just the receiver exists and God modifies himself, the receiver. The way God modifies his energy and his light actually defines what the receiver is. So someone or something or a created being that gets a lot of light will be a large, very huge, very big sort of vessel and a big creation. Maybe it will be a planet. Maybe it will be an angel. Something gets very small, very limited, very modified and contracted light in Memale may just end up being a snail, may just end up being a worm, may just end up being, somebody who doesn't have the depth and the wisdom and the character and the greatness of a larger being. So it's not just that he modifies based on the vessel, his modification also creates the reality of the vessel. That's Memale. So we're going to spend now the next 20 lines discussing Memale, and we're going to address a very fascinating idea, and I'll try and explain the details that are needed to understand this properly. So we're on page Dalet, approximately 10 lines from the top. The first word on the line is Memale. I'm going to start the first 6-7 lines very quickly, because we did the first 6-7 lines already, and then I'm going to come into where we're up to about 1/3 down. Memale kol almin, what is the level of God's filling the world in the way of Memale, filling up, meaning, and the key of Memale really means, the word is hislapshus. Hislapshus means that I am becoming integrated and the receiver could properly receive me. The difference between, in a big way, would be, this is a dramatic extreme on the other end, but a difference would be, for an example, if I'm eating something versus I'm standing next to something. If I'm next to a sandwich, the sandwich and I have nothing really that relates in the sense of I'm incorporating it into myself. It's sitting there. If I eat the sandwich, that sandwich is coming into my existence. It's something I can eat and digest and take. And if the food was not something my body could receive, let's say it was raw chicken, or something which it couldn't be chewed because it's too tough, I couldn't integrate it. The fact that I could take this piece of food and chew it and digest it and be nourished by it means that this is fit for me. Because for a baby, you're not going to give him steak. You're going to give him or her a little baby food. An older child might get a cupcake, also not steak and not medium rare. As the child grows an adult, you can modify what is the right, and also how much nutrients it needs. How much is red meat good? Is red meat not good? Is it good to have more milk, less milk? All depends on the receiver. That's what Memale. Memale is changing what I'm giving and sharing based on who is getting it. So Memale k'almin hi bechinas achayis hamislabeshes. That's the key word, mislabeshes. It becomes, literally, it means enclosed, but it means fully engaged. Toich etzem hanivra shehi mitzimtzemes b'seichei mitzimtzum rav. And the amount of light that comes in the realm of Memale is considering completely who is the receiver, and how much the receiver could get. But even more than that, he says, in the tremendous contraction. Contracting here means becoming small, like condensing, a tremendous condensing. Based on the identity, the character of the created being, what it can receive, which is all created beings are automatically limited. The definition of a created being is that I have a limit. I only have this much space. We're going to see there's 3 dimensions. There's the quality. There's the quantity, which is kamis. Kamis means quantity, which really deals with the size of something or the mass. There is quality, which means the skill, the gift, the product. For example, a sun to give off heat, a brain to think, a light to shine. Everything that has its quality and its time. How long is it here for? Is it here for a month? Is it here for a year? Is it here for 100 years? Is it here for 1,000,000 years? But the ability of something, how long it's going to last, is the 3rd dimension. So there's the kamis, the quantity, the eichus, the quality, and the zman, how long is it here for? So every single thing in the world has those 3 limitations or those 3 descriptions, automatically making them limited by definition in their creation. By definition, it's a created being is limited, in its quantity, and its quality. And he explains, what does it mean, the quality? Its greatness and its importance. How grand is this? How special is this? Hey, welcome back. How we're discussing here, we're in chapter 7, page Daled. Hopefully you're keeping up some of the classes online if you're able to, because we did a lot of deep progress here. We're talking here about the realm of Memale versus Seviv, how Hashem fills up the world in the way of filling up and engaging the world and modifying his light to fit the world and fit the receiver. And that's what we're discussing right now. So everything in the world that's created has a quantity, has a quality. And what does the quality mean? That means ma'lasai v'chashivusai. It means its greatness and its importance, meaning how special is it? A diamond, for an example. A diamond has a value, has a size. It might be a carat, it might be half a carat, and then it has its quality, how it shines and how bright and how it's the luminescence, etc. So everything has a quantity and a quality. And he gives an example, like let's take an example the sun. The body of the sun, and as we discussed last time, referring here to the mass, to the circumference of the sun, has the size of the sun, has a limit, the kamusai in its amount, it's approximately 167 times the size of Earth. Now, by the way, in one place Rambam says 160 approximately, or 170 he says. Then he says somewhere else around 160. It says, sorry, the other place it says it's 166 3/4. That's why he says here around 167, because it depends how he's rounding it off, what the topic is, how close you have to round it off. Here, rounding it off to approximately 167. And that, again, is not what science says. Science has another perspective, and the Rebbe says it's not a contradiction. On 2 levels, first of all, science often changes as you discover more, but also science is talking about the measurement in a way of its volume or mass, and we're talking about the circumference. What that means, I said last time, I don't know. I'm not an astronomer or a scientist, but the Rebbe has a letter on it, and there's a lot of actually, since last week's, I looked up a lot more stuff on the subject. It's fascinating, because according to science, it's about 1 point something million times you could fit the Earth in the sun. And it depends if you're talking about different layers of the sun. It's all different discussions there. And the Rebbe has quite a sharp letter on the subject about how people challenge Torah when Torah is not changing and Torah is truth. You should ask yourself, do I fully understand the subject? Not, it doesn't make sense to me. The famous example I once heard from one of our speakers here, he said it's like somebody who opens up a box of a 1,000-piece puzzle and takes out one piece and goes, what the heck is this piece doing here? You know what? If you put the whole puzzle together and all the pieces are there except one, and this piece doesn't fit in, or all the pieces are there, this piece doesn't fit, then you can ask. But until the puzzle is done, don't ask what this piece is doing. If you want to have a question, make sure you understand the subject fully, then your question is valid. But in any case, he says the sun does have a specific size, whether it's 1,000,000 times the Earth, whether it's 167 times, 7 times the size of the Earth. But the bottom line is, it's a limited size. And my loss there, what does it mean? Its quality. It means how far does it shine? How strong is the heat? Yes, the sun has tremendous heat, but how far is it? We know, even us unprofessionals or myself know, the sun is about 93 million miles away. If it was 200 million miles away, we'd be in big trouble because we'd freeze, meaning the rays would reach us. So the sun's rays are not endless. It only reaches to a certain point. Hashem got a very good location, how far to put it from Earth. He got it right. But the bottom line is the sun's energy and light is limited. You go certain places in the solar system, you won't even know there's a sun. You won't even, there's a coldness, and it's tiny, it doesn't exist. So its size also is limited. Ad kama yuchol lahayr, ki lo yar lebilti tachlis, and it's not going to shine forever. It's shine, and not when I say forever, I mean forever in distance. It's not going to shine endless distances because the heat only has a distance of how far it can heat. You buy a flashlight, 2,000 lumens, 1,000,000 lumens. Well, there's only a distance. At some point, it doesn't go any further. Because the sun is a created being. So everything that's created has a limit of size and quantity, has a limit of quality, and as we'll see, also a limit of time. And he says an interesting thing here. He says, "V'chein kol hanivroim he balig vul v'tachlis." The truth, he says, is every single created being has a limit, has a size, has a limitation. Nothing is endless. And he says, even the universe. We know the earth until the first heaven is Mahalech Tov Kuf Shana, is a 500-year distance. And that's a fascinating thing that we say it's a 500-year distance. It doesn't tell you how far it is. It says 500 years away. And it's interesting because scientists now measure time, distance by years also. How many light years is it? A light year is 126,000, I think, miles per second, whatever it is. But a light year is a distance measured by time. It's a year's worth of traveling of light. So we see that the Torah had this thing, the idea of measuring distances by time, because then you have a much greater distance. Because 500 years traveling how? By boat, by ship, by running, by walking? I don't know. But the bottom line is we say that there's a 500-year distance from Earth to heavens, and each heaven is 500 years thick, and then 500 years, meaning once you get to the end of the whole process, that's the end. That's the end to the solar system. There's the end to the galaxies. There's the end to everything because it comes to an end, because it's a created being. Now that we know that everything is created has a limit, now we'll get back to our point. And this is the point the Alter wants to tell us. Because every single thing in the world has a limit, has what's called a boundary, has a definition of how big, how far, how strong, how expansive it is, we have a tremendous jump here. You have the ingredients coming in as God, unlimited, and the result is, what comes out is limited. That means somewhere in the process, there was a major transformation here. There was a major contraction, because if what you're coming from, the source, is pure, unlimited godliness, and the resulting product is, it's like you put in, gold, and out comes plastic. How'd that happen? I made a thing. How did it go from unlimited energy of Hashem to a finite, limited world? That's what he's saying here. V'imkein, and this is where we're really up to in the Tanya, in our class. V'imkein, hachayis hamalu beshes bahem. That means, because these existences are all limited, and we said a moment before that everything that gets in the world of Memale, the light and energy, is modified to its receiver. That means, let's take for an example, planet Earth. Planet Earth, which is much smaller than the sun, no matter who you listen to, planet Earth has a limited size. The light and energy that creates Earth in the realm of Memale, that gives life to Memale, it gives life to the Earth in the realm of Memale, the level of God that modifies itself to the receiver, that is unlimited. So how do we get from the unlimited, Bleakville, infinite, into this jump, this quantum, I don't want to say leap because it's really short, this exchange to become limited? He says, he b'chinas tzimtzum rav ve'otzum. There has to be a tremendous contraction and a very strong contraction. That means the step from creative light power to creative being is a tremendous contraction. You're taking, and by the way, in my mind, the metaphor I always think in my head, though it may not be the best, is the energy coming from the city or the power source when the energy works, when there's no blackouts. When that energy is coming into your house or into the street, they have these transformer boxes that takes, I don't know how many millions of watts, and give you just, a couple thousand watts or whatever the amount, I don't know, the voltage. The voltage is changed. Why? Because if that voltage came in the way it is, it would blow all your appliances apart. So we have to say that in order for when you see the appliance, when you look at an appliance and electricity coming in makes your laptop work, you must say that between here and the power station, somebody clamped down on the energy. Somebody made a major contraction. That's what we're saying here. The fact that you have created beings that have limits, which all created beings have limits, you must say that there was a massive contraction of that endless, infinite light that was coming to create and the final product. You have to have tremendous contractions, tremendous condensing of the light. Actually, I don't like the word you use the word condensing, because condensing gives the indication that it's all there, but it's smaller. Contraction, which is that we let in much less light. There was a limit, a defining limitation or diminishing of what's coming in. To the point that the contractions, the limitations, the condensing was so strong that the final product came out bloop. They put in all these machines, you can put something in, all the ingredients, and out comes the challah, out comes this. The contraction of the product that came out was limited. So you must say that the contraction that took place here was so amazing. If the product is a limited product, out came a jelly bean. From all these things, somewhere there was a major process of limitations. Now he's going to say, how do we know that the source, or let's describe the source, how powerful the source is. And before we start this next section, I just want to give an introduction to understand in the realm of a human being, how we function. It says, from my flesh, I know God. There's something about the human being, our structure, our function, our soul, that gives us a window into godliness. We want to break down our function or our spiritual energy, our light, our life force, to three categories. Our essence, our soul, who we are, the essence soul, the 10 powers of the soul, and the garments of the soul. And really, a lot of this we discussed in chapter 3 and 4 in Tanya. If you want to think back, a couple of years, in chapter 3, we spoke about the 10 powers of the soul, and chapter 4, we spoke about the garments of the soul. The 10 powers of the soul are made up of two things, seichel and midas. Seichel and midas, our seichel is intellect, the cognitive abilities to conceive of ideas, to comprehend ideas, and to apply ideas. That's all intellectual, nothing emotional about it. Then you have the 7 emotive characteristics, which are chesed, gevurah, tiferes, netzach, etc., etc. Those 10 powers of the soul. So the first thing, the soul, that's for sure me. That's all me. That's my identity as a soul. The second thing, the 10 powers of the soul, that's all me too, because this is how I feel. This is how it's all about me. I feel, I think. Even if I change my mind on something, I changed. For an example, I learn about a certain thing I always thought was good for you. I found out it's bad for you. Or I found out a certain person I thought was not my friend. I found out as my brother, lost long brother. Information can change it changes me inside. Then you have a third thing called garments. Garments of the soul are no longer about me. It's not who I am, it's what I do. As this is one of the main focuses of the earlier part of Tanya, garments, which is thought, speech, and action. Action for sure is what I do, interfacing with the world. Speech is what I'm telling and sharing. And even thoughts, when I'm thinking about something, it's no longer me. It's I am thinking, that means something I'm doing. My emotions and my intellect is me. That's who I am. Very hard to change that. Very hard to change who you are. You could. That's why a tzaddik could do that. A Beinoni can't change who you are. You could change what you do. Your machshava, your thought, your speech, your action, that you could change completely. So the thought, speech, and action is no longer you. As a matter of fact, everything you say and everything you do and everything you think doesn't have to be you. For an example, I could disagree very much with a political person. But if I'm able to be honest with myself, I could think and say, you know what? I hear his point of view. That means I could think thoughts. I could certainly say things I don't believe in. They say the metaphor we used, if you remember, years ago, was thoughts and speech and action are like costumes. It's like clothes. I could dress up any way I want. I could dress up like a pilot. Doesn't mean I'm a pilot. I could dress up, and as a matter of fact, look, I could be gardening in my garden, dressed like a gardener, and then go to a bar mitzvah, dress up with a tie and a suit. Then I go to a Purim party, and who am I really? None of those. Those are just my garments. The garments are my thought, my speech, my action. But my identity, who I am, that doesn't change. That means when I'm expressing myself, I'm actually concealing my true self. You're not getting the real me. When I'm sharing an emotion, when I'm sharing a thought, when I'm sharing something, you're only getting a window, a glimpse. Just an example would be, we have a very dear friend who just lost her husband, Lainey. As much as she shares how she feels, we'll never understand how she feels. Why? Because her depth of her feeling can never be expressed in words. Words cannot contain how she feels. And therefore, in that aspect, as much as you will define and say something, you can't fully express it because words limit. That is what we have to know here. Why is that important to know that? Because when we're talking now, that God's relationship that we're discussing, his light that's infinite, we're not talking about God's essence, how he is. That for sure is above the world. We're not talking about God as he comes down into a description of 10 spheros, of his creation, Chachma Bina Das. That's of course above the world. We're talking about God in the 10 utterances. God in utterances, that's already the world of Dibur. That's God's speech. Speech is already a disconnect. It's what God's doing. That little, imagine we jump down from God's essence to God's 10 spheros, so to like us, the speech of God, which speech in general is the most limiting of all of them in a way, because even it says a picture is 1,000 words. When you're speaking, you're limited. You want to describe a picture, look at the picture, and I could talk about it for an hour. It's a one, but words are very, very limited. And again, the more you speak, sometimes the more you limit. You want to thank somebody, just say thank you. Sometimes I want to thank you for this, this, and this. How about that? You lift up this. Don't start getting the details. So in other words, the speech is already a very limited aspect of God, of God's expression. I should say God's not limited. Very limited aspect of his expression. So we're going to say this, that we say that there's a great symptom, that there's a great contraction. We're talking about from the level of God's speech. That's very important to know, as we'll see here. Now, back inside. Last word on the line is key. Ki makar hachayis, the source of all the light that we're talking about now in the creation that had to be contracted and condensed to create. Hu ruach piv shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is the spirit, the wind, the air, the energy of God's mouth, so to speak. Hamislabish ba'asara ma'amodis shebeteira, which enclothes itself in the 10 utterances of the Torah. That means we're talking now about a level of Hashem, a level of godliness that is so condensed that is able to enter the world of words. That means it's the ultimate contraction and concealment. And still there we say from there, we need to have a tremendous concealment and contraction in order to get from there into actual created beings, whether it's an angel, whether it's a planet, whether it's a human being or a snail. If Hashem would have created just with his words, without having a tremendous contraction after that, in that space before he created, every single thing he created would be infinite. As a matter of fact, you would never get down to lower levels, because everything's at layers. The first layer would be infinite. You would never get down to physical stuff, because the infinite creation of angels would be, how many are there? Infinite, like God's words. So it would never be a world that's finite. There would be no end. It would be infinite, because the creative process is infinite energy. The ingredients are all not gluten-free. The product is not gluten-free. If the ingredients are infinite, the product is infinite. So meaning that from here, even God's words, the product would have been an infinite product. He says the extension, the spreading, Hashem's energy would have created in quantity, in quality, and in time, endless creation. That means you look at the sun, it wouldn't be a sun that only has a certain size. How big is it? Infinite, no end. It's like someone tells us, what's the highest, how high could you count? There's no end. As long as you're counting, there's no end. It's like a circle. The best way to understand the metaphor is a circle. If you go around the circle 30 times, how much closer are you to the end? You can go 1 billion times around, you're no closer than when you started. What do you mean? I went down 1 billion times already. It makes no difference, because it's infinite. That's the definition of Google. In the Google concept 8, it's infinite. So world creation, everything will be infinite. So it can't be that Hashem created it without a symptom. Never would have been a universe, never would have been a world as we know it. So Hashem must have had a contraction, a massive contraction, even from his words. Now in the parentheses here, the Alter Rebbe is going to warn of a certain question. What's the question? And he doesn't ask it in the question, but the way I heard Rabbi Yael Khan explain it is as follows. He says that if we just look at this statement here, and especially comparing it to the human function of our soul essence, our 10 powers and our speech, why do you say that this speech needs another contraction? We spend so much time in Tanya and Chassid is talking that speech is the ultimate contraction, the ultimate concealer. Whenever you want to say God created with concealment, we say Hashem created with words. Words by definition are concealment. That's the way we describe it. In my world, if I want to share something with you, as deep as it is, once I explain it, I just limited it. Why is it necessary any more contraction after that? If I already said it's speech, speech means I hid everything behind my mouth, meaning my feelings, my intellect, and I'm sharing with you only words. Words, you know what they say, it's from the mouth and the lips and out. It's just verbal. I am not sharing any of my true self with you. So why does that require this great contraction? That's what's bothering, so to speak, the Alter Rebbe as he's speaking here. 1 second. Isn't it already called a contraction of speech? Why isn't speech enough? By a human being, if I say I spoke, that means I gave you nothing of what's inside of me. Just some speech, not me, not myself, something I did, something that came out of me, just the words. We say we want to explain how insignificant the world is to God. That was only created with words, nothing else. So why do we say that the world still needs another contraction? If not, it will be infinite. And the answer he's going to say is, and that's why I gave the metaphor before of a snail. The answer is the snail. God, we'll say it inside in a minute. God's essence cannot be separated as him and his words and his. Remember we said him and his thought, his thinker, the think is all one. Same thing with his words. Even though yes, it's words and it's a level down and it's a layer down, but just like the snail, or some people say the word is the turtle. Two different ways people translate this word here, kamsa, as we'll see in a minute. I always thought it was a turtle, but I heard other people say it's a snail, so I don't know. So either the snail or the turtle, both of them, their shell grows with them. The shell grows with them. So on one hand, it's not me, it's a shell. But on the other hand, the shell does change in size. It's a phenomenal concept, meaning the external and me are really one. By Hashem, his words and his essence can't be separated. I mean, just like we said, we can't separate Hashem's thought and his essence. You can't separate God's words and his essence. So while it's true that in general, by human beings, we do have a major cutoff by our mouth, and what I'm sharing is a tiny bit of my essence. I can talk for months about a certain thing, and I won't cover the topic at all. I once saw, I think it was the Alter Rebbe or one of the Rebbes, who had a dream about a certain custom that was done by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, of explaining what the reason for this custom is. And I think he told his son, I forget which Rebbe it was, he told his son, it would take me 60 years to explain this to you. And I'm thinking, I could see talking about something takes 2 hours, 3 hours, 60 years, that's a lot of talking. And that was like one dream he had for a few moments. 60 years to explain it, because words is one thing if you see and experience it, but to tell it over, you could never finish the story. That's by human being. By God, enclosed in the words is the essence too. And that's what it's like the turtle, it's like the snail, where the shell being the words. The words and God are one. So true, it's a condensing, but it would give over the same as God. That means the product would also be infinite. It's a much lesser of, I'd say lesser infinite, but it's a much lesser level of God's revelation. But even though it's words, it would still be infinite. Let's see this inside. Starting the parentheses, the bottom of the page, and we'll finish with this today. Just like Hashem is called infinite, that's God's Ein Sof. That's the level of God pre the 10 spheros. So first level, we said 3 levels: God's essence, the 10 spheros, and then the 10 utterances. Just like God's essence is infinite, similarly, all his emotions, his attributes, and his things that he does are all one. The ihu v'garmihu chad literally means him and his vessels are one. Him and his thought is one, and the vessel, there is no God separation of him and what he does. It's all one. Hainu, hachayis hanimsheches mimidaisav. That means, what does it mean here? It's all one. The life force that flows, that ebbs from his attributes, which is chesed and v'rachamim, which could be kindness and mercy, that's teferes, ushar mudaisav hakdeishos, next page, and all the other holy emotions or emotive characteristics. Ayideis labshusan shemislabshos beruach piv, through its becoming enclosed and, so to speak, engaged in his speech. Like it says, Ki Omar v'yehi, like it says, he spoke and there was. Like it says also, Hashem created worlds with chesed. And it's what is those words? Those words are not a disconnect from God's emotions. Meaning the words that God said and the emotions where they came from and the source where the emotions came from is all one. The 3 stages that we have: self, characteristics of the soul, and the garments of the soul. By us, it's 3 separate worlds. By God, it's all one. So yes, it's there. Now you have to understand, what does it mean? It's like us if it's all one. I don't know. but why they still exist independent concepts of God's essence, God's 10 spheros, and the 10 utterances, they're all really one, because that same chesed that comes from God's infinite self, before it even had a description, that is the same chesed that comes into the words. And he gives the metaphor, kahadein kamsa, like that, either turtle or snail, de levushe minei ubei, its garment, which words are garment, its garment and its self is one. You can't separate them. You can't say the turtle is not connected to the garment because the shell or the hard part grows with it. So what is it? Just another line. It's just that Hashem contracted it, that it's able to go from his utterances, meaning Hashem said the 10 utterances, and he allowed them to come into the different formations of the words of the Asaras Adibros, Asar Mamaris, the 10 utterances. And we're going to start from here next week. But to explain this one thing, even when you get into the 10 utterances, as you mentioned, if you remember, we gave all different metaphors of how in the 10 utterances themselves, there are some things said clearly. Some things are written where it includes things in a way of exchanging letters of numerical value. Sometimes there's letters that switch and interact with each other. Meaning they're all different layers of how much energy or how limited the energy is to receiver, whether it became something like a piece of wood or a stone, whether it became something that has intelligence, something that has spirituality to it, all depends how clear it was included in the 10 utterances. In other words, how much do the words conceal, how much of the garments conceal God's energy. So again, this is all explaining how Memale, while it is a tremendous, powerful source of light, it had a tremendous contraction, a tremendous concealment, and with that, Hashem was able to create and give life to everything within this world. And we're going to continue this point. Hopefully tomorrow, next week, the week after, we'll finish this chapter.